So hello everyone, welcome to Alternative View or simply AltView. At AltView, we chat with the industry leaders, get to know them, their opinions and insights, and also hear their views. May they be popular, unpopular, brand new, alternative, or anything in between. I'm your host, Yaoqi from All-Layer, Elastic Execution Layer on Ethereum for Web3. Today, I'm super glad to have Dmitriy Berenzon, research partner at 1KX, where he focuses on crypto research and investments. It's our great pleasure to have him to talk about L2s and appchains. And Dmitry, thanks so much for being here and talking to us and our listeners. Can you share a little bit about your self-introduction and also what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Background is in traditional finance, worked for a bank for 6 years. The first 4 were doing a variety of strategy roles, often building out internal fintech products around real-time payments, big data analytics. And then my last 2 years there building out their innovation labs, opened up 5 around the world, New York, Palo Alto, Berlin, London, Singapore. So kind of like entered the space with more of a DeFi lens and have been investing in crypto since 2017. Spent a year with a fund called Coin Fund out of New York doing research in DD, and then 2 years leading research and investments at a crypto family office called Bollinger Investment Group. And I've been with 1KX for the last 2 years, generally focused on general research, do a lot of writing in the space across a number of topics, app chains, cross-chain bridges, NFT finance, AMMs. The second is portfolio support, helping with token design, go-to-market strategies, BD and partnerships, following fundraising, kind of whatever is burning for a project at the moment. And the third is in, general like investment DD from first calls to investment committee. So very grateful to be doing all of those things at once.
Yeah, your experience like sort of sounds amazing. I mean, like all sort of align with like sort of as you mentioned, right, bridges, like app chains, and meanwhile, a lot of things are critical to the crypto industry, as you mentioned, right, token design and also various designs around the cryptos. And meanwhile, right, as we all know, like back in October 2022. You released a blog post like sort of application-specific blockchains, the past, the present, and future, and got a lot of tractions to these app chains. And people discussed about like sort of what's app chain and why we need the app chains. So since you are here, right, I really want to know your opinion. So what's your definition for app chain and why it's so important? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I broadly define it as any chain with its own dedicated block space. I think there have been examples of this for a long time. Bitcoin, Arweave, these are like examples of app chains. I think when people generally think of these things, what comes up is usually Cosmos. But I also want to clarify that you could also bucket, or I bucket rollups as app chains as well, because I also think rollups are blockchains. They are trust minimized blockchains with two-way trust minimized bridges. So I was thinking, should I, introduce a new term? One was app space. I think rollups are also floating around. I do like the latter more. But I think when we talk about app chains, I also want like the listener, the viewer to remember that we're talking about rollups as well. So this could be optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, Avalanche subnets, Polygon, Supernets, Polkadot parachains, Cosmos chains. It's a pretty wide like menu of things you could have. And in general, I think it's very important because it is an important design choice for a team when they're thinking about how to scale. And that's across both infrastructure and applications. And I think it has a lot of deep implications for a project's UX and go-to-market. And that decision shouldn't be taken lightly. I actually don't think that app chains are the best solution for everyone. And it's very easy to jump into like a new trend because we think it's cool or because your teams are doing it. that's what a lot of token projects did, or project with tokens with like VE models. Like we still don't know if that's like a good thing long term, you know, and so I think we just need a lot of like critical thinking around like whether this makes sense for your project today.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. As you mentioned, right? Probably when we call them like appchains, actually we include a lot of other like terms in their sort of context. For example, as you mentioned, right? Cosmos typically call their appchains zones, and Polkadot call parachains, right? And then Avalanche, Subnight, Polygon, Supernight. And then to the Ethereum space, we have the optimistic rollup and also the ZK rollup, right? So based on your like sort of experience and also observations from the different like sort of factors, right? You list a bunch of these, we don't call it metrics, but it's really like different factors when people want to choose which like sort of action to use, right? You have a big table. So in your opinion, what are the most important like sort of benefits we can get from these appchains or rollups, or what are the drawbacks we can foresee in the future if some teams choose like sort of this appchain approach? Yeah.
For sure. I bucket it on the benefit side into three things: performance, customizability, and value capture. I think on the performance side, you don't need to share a block space. You know, I think like that alone allows you to just have very dedicated like resources. You're likely just using one or like a few machines, and you have like that bare metal to yourself. So you're able to really like crank up like the transaction speed, like lower the latency, lower the costs. You're able to keep costs both like low and predictable. And from that perspective, you could argue it's better UX, and we can get into some of the downsides of that. On the customizability side, you could modify your like EVM client if you need to. You could change the way transactions are ordered on your chain. You could have changes to the way your like P2P layer works and how like transactions are propagated. There's like a ton of customizability that you could have. And I think for a specific class of applications, that customizability around your like finality, your security, the permissioning is very important. And on the value capture side, it's a more crypto native way of capturing value. You don't particularly need a token. You could have a way to do it. If you have your own protocol token in like a subnet or a Cosmos chain, it does serve as like some like medium of exchange. But if you wanted to have an Ethereum rollup with ETH as a gas token, you could probably create some like EIP like 1559 mechanic and stuff, like play on that, where a portion of the gas fee goes to like a protocol treasury as well. Or if you run your own sequencer, you could probably capture like revenue through MEV. So there's like a lot of interesting like crypto native like value capture opportunities, and then you don't even need to turn on a fee switch as well if you're doing that. So those are a lot of like interesting benefits. I think there's actually quite a number of drawbacks. I think one, like I can name three. One important one is the friction that you introduce around composability and atomicity. I think you could still have composability, what makes it hard is to reason about atomic transactions when you start to think about chains. Like some teams are looking at doing this, like thing like the Cosmos like interchain scheduler is an interesting idea there. I think on the Ethereum in the Ethereum world, you could potentially do cross rollup atomicity with the shared sequencer. And I think atomicity is important for DeFi in particular because you effectively get like unlimited like capital efficiency when it comes to things like flash loans, and I think that's actually pretty important for like system safety. You introduce like additional friction around like having to bridge like funds and state from like one app chain to another. I think it also introduces additional developer lift. There are ways to solve that, but it's not just as simple as deploying a contract. You do need to think about a lot more like DevOps related stuff. Like if you do want to run your own like validator set or like sequencer, that might be out of the area of expertise for like a Solidity developer. And at an ecosystem level, there's this sad dystopia that could happen if you introduce too many walled gardens. Part of the thing you can do with customizability is to control who has right access to your chain. And this might work for like actually like enterprise use cases where maybe like some company they want to control who is able to deploy contracts, or maybe they want some process by which to bridge funds onto the app chain. You need to have like a soul-bound token issued by a KYC provider. If you take that to its logical conclusion, if everyone has permissioned access, you've recreated the walled gardens that crypto's trying to break down in the first place. So it's a really sensitive path dependency that I don't know like how that's going to play out, but it's definitely like an ecosystem-wide concern that we should just be like mindful of.
Yeah, that's so true. It's especially on the first part, right? I believe like sort of right now, like for crypto space, right? Most of the applications, I mean, the crypto native applications are still DeFi associated applications, right? So basically in that case, if we really want to have sort of the capital efficiency, the best way that we have all the sort of liquidity or application on the same chain, even without bridges, right? So either we can do flash loan or we can call protocols across the protocols much easier, right? So we're the same chain. Of course, as you mentioned, right, we can definitely also have some bridges. If we can make the bridge into the atomicity like consideration, right? For example, either as you mentioned, right, some shared sequencer across different rollups, or probably we can also have some scheduler like in this Cosmos or Polkadot equal like this kind of framework, right? So we can just make it more convenient for developers to call different like sort of applications, call different appchains. Actually, the another thing you just mentioned, like I feel like it's quite interesting, is about like sort of the advantages of the app chain, right? I think because right now most of the application, crypto native application, they don't have a lot of users. I would say probably only have less than 1,000 users, right? Then we can see the application chain or application rollup, right, and not the necessary components for the application at the moment, because they don't really need so much block space at the moment. But in the future, for example, if we really have some applications with a million of users, right, like games or social application, in that case, I don't think we have a lot of choices if they just want to sort of sit on single general purpose L1 or general purpose L2, because the traffic and users just too many, and you have to find ways to provide better user experience. But anyway, we also have some follow-up questions regarding that point, so we can discuss later on. Yeah, so the another cool things like in your blog post or in your research, like you mentioned that they also have different like big categories for these application chains or rollups, right? One we call monolithic, and the other one we call modular, like sort of app chains. Like in your opinion, like which way do you think is better to scale the application in the near future? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the majority of cases, I think modular is better. For the reason that you need to pay less for security. When you think about the capital requirements to have a monolithic chain, it's a lot. You look at like the Polkadot parachain auctions. I think they started out. It was like millions to hundreds of thousands of dollars per parachain, and you don't even like own that block space. Like you rent it for 2 years. That's like really expensive, you know. And then when you're trying to have like some like sufficiently decentralized and incentivized validator set on a Cosmos chain, you're probably giving away a chunky amount of like token incentives to like to pay for the security of your chain. I forget the numbers around like a Avalanche subnet. It was something around like 150K per year in like dollars, in dollar equivalent of AVAX that you had to stake. And so for a lot of teams starting out, they don't have that kind of money. And like the really nice part about rollups is like you don't need to do that. What you do need to pay for is settlement costs and data availability costs. But I think that's like much cheaper. So I think if you're starting out, I think you're probably fine with a rollup. Once you start to your point, like have like scale in like the hundreds of thousands to millions of users, maybe you need more stuff. And then you could think about, you know, whether it makes sense to effectively like move to your own island, I guess, like like outside of like a rollup or like your own country, effectively. But I think that will make more sense for more teams over time as like the industry scales and applications get more mature. But it feels for like a lot of use cases like overkill.
For the moment, yes. But in the future, like if we really have a lot of users, right, for the application, probably as you mentioned, we need some sort of economic efficient solutions. Like as you mentioned, right, if a rollup is really like sort of much cheaper than the other like standalone app chains, probably we need to make it like a rollup as a service, right? So if you need to scale, and then you can spin off more rollups, and if, for example, the market condition not good, you can scale down, with less like sort of rollup to handle the users. So that's a really good point, I would say. And then like as we all know, right? So right now Ethereum is already like moving to a proof of stake. And basically, if you look at the roadmap of Ethereum, it's really like rollup centric scaling approach. And Ethereum itself is trying to position itself as a settlement and a data availability layer, and basically also the execution to L2s like rollups, right? And how do you feel about the current rollup space around this Ethereum? And do you think in the near future, right, as we all discussed, like sort of the application specific rollup can be a good way to drive sort of the scaling issues for the dApps around the Ethereum? Yeah, because we all know, right, since the beginning, like back in 2015, Vitalik always trying to find ways to scale Ethereum. State sharding, Plasma, optimistic rollup, ZK rollup, and right now, like all new EIPs just trying to scale Ethereum. But like what do you think about the current rollup space? And in the future, if we really have like tons of thousands application running in this space, right? how we can handle so many applications.
Yeah, I mean, I love rollups. I think like it's like it just makes a lot of economic sense. It has taken a while to figure out, to your point, like the model that works. And like the scariest part is the unknown unknowns. And that's kind of what we found with Plasma. Like with the mass exit problem, it was kind of like, oh, like this doesn't work, and but like everyone was like super excited about it.
Yeah.
I think with rollups, we finally got into a place where it's like much more like production ready. I think there's very interesting applications that even now I'm seeing a reversal in the order of operations on which teams launch. And I think initially we saw them launch on ETH L1 first, and then actually move to an L2. I'm seeing increasingly teams just like launch natively on an L2. So I think it's actually like very organic traction and demand. And I think we're going to continue to see more developers choose a rollup, especially once you have more like fiat on and off ramps and or like wallet integrations and things like that. I could see hundreds of rollups, thousands of rollups. The issue that I don't think is being addressed is a good way to do message passing across these rollups. That's very like Ethereum specific. Like Cosmos has had this for a while with interchain accounts, and Avalanche has shipped their own like homegrown like messaging system thing. So like those two ecosystems are very much like thinking about how you do cross-chain communication, and Polkadot had this with XCMP.
XCM.
XCM. So they've had this for a while. With Ethereum rollups, we don't really see that, and it's kind of like being solved with like, I don't know, third-party bridges. In certain cases, it could be solved within rollups, like particularly with like ZK rollups. It have the concept of like an L3 that uses like recursive proofs, and you could have two L3s that use an L2 as a settlement layer. So you could validate the proof of one L3 from another L3, and that's one way to do bridging. So I could imagine ways to do that within like the ZK Sync world and like the Starknet world. But it still begs the question of like, how do you have like efficient communication between like optimistic rollups and ZK rollups in a way that is like native to the protocol? And that's probably where like the Ethereum community like hasn't really put too much thought into it. And I guess I understand why, because just like getting rollups live alone is such a Herculean task in general. But I think we'll probably need to get to a point where we try to figure out, I don't know, like some standard for like safe cross rollup messaging.